We have a quorum and it's the appointed time. The agenda today, we have 8 papers for discussion, and the government has provided ECI paper 17 for your perusal, and it lists the changes in directorate establishment, and we also have the impact on directorate establishment in the 8 items. So I need to remind you, if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest, please, according to ROP 83A, disclose your relevant interest before you speak. And also, please note ROP 84, where you have direct pecuniary interest, there are some rules on voting. So today we continue our discussion on EC 2018-1930, the CEDD, Lands Department, Planning Department, and Government Property Agency, where we have a lot of directorate posts that will be converted to permanent posts, and we also have conversion to supernumerary posts and so on. Last week we had already one round of discussion, and before the meeting, the government has responded to members' questions, and last night Mr. Al-Hakim also provided some information, and he has posed some questions, and these are tabled in front of you. We now have 2 members in the queue. First of all, we have to thank the government for explaining why these posts are necessary. I only have one question. That is, the multi-use principle is good, but I had a question whether you belong to Chunwan City Hall, the music halls, will those be demolished for multi-purposes? Because some music fans told me that it is very expensive to demolish and rebuild again. And the existing venues have very good acoustics. They also have a lot of cultural activities. So will the government demolish these city halls? Thank you for your opinion. As you mentioned, I think we're talking about Chunwan City Hall. In the budget, we set aside 22 billion, and there are some plots of land in Chunwan, including the City Hall. And in the last meeting, at this stage, whether Chunwan City Hall will be demolished, it's not certain. We do want to consult the districts. Each district has different opinions. Some say that the building is not very old and the acoustics are actually quite good. So on this item, we will gather feedback from the district. Well, I hope that you do take heed of the community's views and music aficionados' views. It's very hard to build a new city hall. Okay. Second round, Mr. Jie Wai-chun. Mr. Tony Jie, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. To deal with the increased workload, the government has put forward some suggestions, and they need to increase manpower. I support that. But in our discussion item, whether you're talking about the head count or supernumerary posts and permanent posts deployment, I think the government reasoning is insufficient, and you can even say that they are trying to bulldoze it. And if you look at the CEDD, there are 3 chief engineers converted from supernumerary to permanent posts, and the reasons are, why do I say it's insufficient reason? Because we know that construction projects will come to an end. In the paragraph 13 of the paper, it says that there are 2 of the chief engineers. It's stated bluntly one is responsible for designated Gudong Bak and Fanlang North development areas, and you know that these development areas are developed in 2 phases, and we forecast that they will be completed in 2026 and 2031. So I think that should be supernumerary, because when phase 1 ends at 2026, we still need to assess whether we need these 2 chief engineers, because the works will be reduced. But then the government reasoning is that there's a lot of follow-up work. They have to monitor the situation for a few years, and there might be other work. Well, Chairman, if that is confirmed, well, then you can use that reasoning for the majority of supernumerary posts. So I feel that their reasons are insufficient. And the Lands Department, that is a supernumerary post, but they are responsible. I'd like you to look at the annex, the job duties. Of course, they are responsible for Gudong North, Fanlang North, including Hongshui Q. All the lands administration, coordination, housing, government, community, and other land supply, permanent and temporary lands work. So the government explained on the last occasion that was just an amendment. Well, it's not just a land resumption. Just this district alone. What about the follow-up work? What about when land is sold? And you say that, do we have more manpower at the district level? After the works are completed, shouldn't the follow-up work be conducted by the district? So I can say, Chairman, there's emphasis on construction and negligence in the management. So the workload, it's actually very large and recurrent. So it should be converted to a permanent post. But for new development areas and the extra planning work involved, they don't increase manpower there. It's not mentioned. So the whole issue, the reasoning, is insufficient. And on page 20, it talks about the increase in this directorate. I will queue in the next round. You ask 4 minutes, and let's hear the government's response. Is it Ms. Ho? Yes, thank you for the question. How we decide to convert supernumerary to permanent posts, it depends on operation needs. You did not mention that we have multi-purpose use. We have 2 posts in the GPA, and we have a Chief Land Surveyor. That is a permanent post, because we feel that multi-purpose land use is a recurrent work. The Lands Department Chief Surveyor is responsible for land resumption in new developed areas. You are correct. Aside from land resumption, after the site is formed, they also are responsible for allotting the land. We see that there is a time constraint. Perhaps in 10 years, it will lead to increased workload in Lands Department. Aside from recurrent work, we know that work can be delegated to the community district level. Well, why isn't the same reasoning applicable to the CEDD? Well, you mentioned Gudong North, Fanlang North, but in the northern district we only have one permanent post, and most of the time they are responsible for Shatin. Nobody's responsible for Taipo in northern district. So first round, Mr. Alvin Young. I would like to follow up on Mr. Chia's question. We are converting posts to permanent posts, whether it's 10 or 20 years, the works will come to an end. And on the last occasion, the government, when they answered they said after Gudong North, Fanlang North, they still have to work on the golf course and other projects. But these will all come to an end. So I don't understand why do they convert it to a permanent post unless the person is deployed from one post to another. Now, if you say if they want to convert from A to B, they still have to come back to the ESC and FC because according to 2016 April, the Secretary for Financial Services and Treasury stroke 1516/01, the paper said that the funding from FC, and when this post is deployed to other posts, the government needs to consult LegCo ESC and make an application to FC. So put simply, they have to come back to LegCo. So if that is true and if the government agrees, then you are applying for a permanent post and then you have to come back. I want to ask, why shouldn't it be an extension of a supernumerary post? That is more reasonable rather than granting an application and coming back and doing the same exercise all over again. Ms. Ho, thank you for the question. We feel that these 3 chief engineer posts, there is a long-term necessity. After the last occasion discussion, we have an extra document tabled today listing these 3 chief engineers in their workload in the future. So let me talk about Gudong North and Fanlang North because they are working in responsible for NTNE. So aside from completing NTNE, which will be finished in 2031, so even if the electrical and mechanical engineering is completed by 2031, there is still follow-up work. The 2 colleagues will have to be responsible. Aside from that, 1 chief engineer is responsible for.
He will be responsible for the study of the 32 hectares of the golf course and also for North NT Phase 1, that is Santin and Lok Ma Chau. The area is 175 hectares, so it is not of a small size. And after that, we would have to do the detailed design, we have to seek funding, etc. And then if we look at the North from a broader perspective, other than these 2 projects that I mentioned, we also see that in the northern districts there are a lot of lands which will be rezoned for housing use, and that will bring extra population to the northern districts. So we need more infrastructure and we need chief engineers to spearhead the jobs. Now for the land transport of NT Northwest, we still need to do a lot of work. Well, we always look at the infrastructural needs, and we really need specified engineers to lead the projects. And for the NT North Planning Department, now we just have 1 chief engineer. He's responsible for the work of Sha Tin, and nobody is taking care of Tai Po and the northern districts. So structurally, this is not that ideal. And we think there is a need to turn these 2 posts into permanent. And for the 3rd chief engineer, he's responsible for the Hong Shui Q project, and that will even be a longer project. The whole project will be completed by 38 and 39. Well, according to the government, then we do not need supernumerary posts because, well, you can continue to give more work to a particular supernumerary post and then there will be a permanent need. So I really do not understand the government's logic. I'm not just talking about these projects. I'm talking about the thinking of the government. And it is because of this the Civic Party will object to this proposal. Ms. Ho, do you want to respond? As I said just now, supernumerary posts will be turned into permanent posts, and the government bureaus and departments have reviewed all this. We have an internal mechanism, and the financial services and the Treasury Department and also the Civil Service Bureau will also be looking at all these, so there are checks and balance. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. Now for CEDD, it's divided in Northeast, Southwest, and Lantau offices. I understand that. Now for CEED North, it seems that you do not have enough manpower. That's your worst. But for East, South, and West, you have enough manpower. Now for CEDD South and CEDD East, you need to roll out other projects. So later on, after these projects are completed, they will have less work to do. You won't be telling me that by 2031, Kowloon East will still not finish their job. So when the government thinks about deployment of manpower, you can't say that because there are new projects in NT North, so the supernumerary post has to be converted to a permanent one. And for the other officers, because some of their projects will be finished, so I think the manpower can be deployed. So that is why I don't understand. At a particular moment, well, maybe because there are projects across the territory, so that's insufficient manpower. So that's why we allowed you to create a supernumerary post. But now you are telling us that for your Northern District office, you have to turn this supernumerary post into permanent posts. We have only one CEDD. Yes, we need 2 to 3 chief engineers to have a reasonable establishment, but you really have to look at the actual needs. You can't say that because you have a team here and then there are several teams elsewhere. All the teams would need the same manpower and the same number of chief engineers. And when you talk about using the same sites for several purposes, we are actually talking about 2 levels. First, let's look at the sites, whether it can be used for multiple purposes. And secondly, is the site ready for multiple purposes? Now, today maybe due to some restrictions, the buildings can only be 10 stories high. But if you are more prepared in terms of planning, for example, if the foundation is well built so that it's ready for that, then in the future, if there's such needs, then on that site, 1 or 2 stories can be added. So for what you said about multiple users for one site, that include what I said. Thank you for your question. Let me answer the first one, and then Mr. Lee of CEDD would tell you more about CEDD East and South, and why the chief engineers cannot share the responsibilities of this newly created permanent post. Now for changing supernumerary posts to permanent posts internally, we have to go through very strict procedures. That is, we have to look at CEDD's directorate level and whether this directorate officers can take up extra work. It's not that because we have a new project, we need a new permanent post. And for Mr. Wu Chi-wai's second question about using a site for multiple purposes, yes, we agree with you. So when the government discusses internally, we understand that there is a shortage of land supply. So for the GPA in the future, when it talks to different departments about using the same complex. Well, for example, if a plot ratio is 10 and if it hasn't found enough government departments to take up the 10, then we will still use the ratio 10. So for government departments and NGOs, they really need this kind of officers. So we hope that we can make the best use of sites. Even though when the project starts, we haven't identified all the tenants, we're trying our best to make the best use of the relevant sites. Mr. Ray Chen. Madam Chair. Well, this morning members have asked a lot of questions about converting numerary posts into permanent posts. As to whether this can be done, I understand that the projects are still ongoing. And I want to ask, why is this the right moment to make such an application? The government gives us a supplementary paper this morning, and now they are using a schedule to set out the details concerning the post, that is the implementation timetable, the duties, etc. I think this is good. Now it's clearer. Madam Chair, if we look at this annex, then we would have a better understanding. Why is now the right moment for North 1, that is the development of Kutong North and Fanling North? You say that with the permission of the Finance Committee, or for example for West 4, it's even better. It is now planned that application for funding will be tabled at LegCo at the end of 2019. So the LegCo has not approved the funding for the project yet. If you want to tell me that you are doing some work, you definitely can prove that. And for West 4, the project would not be completed by 2039. And here you also say that this person has to monitor the project, and a lot of work will still have to be done in the coming few years. Of course, that is always true. But why is this the opportune time? We even haven't approved the funding for the project yet. Why do you now want to change the supernumerary post to permanent post? Why is it the right time now for the supernumerary post? Actually, it will lapse on the 1st. It lapsed on the 1st of April, so we'll have to think about the future. And of course, there are other choices, as the member said. Why do we choose to turn them into permanent posts? Because we think that there is a long-term operational need. After Kutong North and Fanling North, and even after Hong Shui Kiu North projects, for these 3 chief engineers, they will still have a lot of work to do. This is actually in response to some members' views. That is, before we carry out a project, we need to do the planning first. We shouldn't do it in a fragmented manner. We should adopt a holistic view and look at the policy. So these chief engineers are sort of like district heads. Well, today is already the 3rd of April, and those posts have already lapsed. So why can't you come here earlier to make the application? They still have to queue up. Next, Mr. Silka Chan, 3rd round. Morning, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the Deputy Secretary for the paper. Last time we asked many questions about using the same site for multiple purposes. And here you says that this is not a new idea, and then you go on to explain. And you are saying that for the public transport interchanges, there are eateries and offices. I kind of understand part of it. If this is not a new idea, then why are you trying to tell me that this is a great model? It seems that no one has seen it before. The government is creating expectation, but when it's realized, you are telling us that it's nothing unusual. And then for turning the supernumerary posts into permanent posts, I think members and I are not satisfied with it. Now, if we want certain supernumerary posts to be turned permanent, because this post actually serve people, they are welfare posts, you are not willing to do that. So now you want to turn certain supernumerary posts into permanent ones. You seem to have a lot of justification. So we really are not satisfied with your arrangement. And also in your paper, paragraph 39, you have talked about the chief town planner, and one of his tasks is to review the town planning ordinance in order to enhance the monitoring system of illegal activities in the rural areas. Does it involve fly tipping at Pui O? The government has been telling us that you will be solving this problem, but that's for years. You have just been talking, and for the fugitives ordinance, you can do it right away. Thank you for your question. Let me answer the last question first. For the chief town planner, he will be responsible for taking care of the town planning ordinance. The member is right. Why are we reviewing the town planning ordinance? Because in Lantau South,
We see in Soi Hao Bui in the past, there have been land reclamation, fly tipping, and the planning department cannot enforce law. The areas I mentioned are not development areas. So on this review, we, even if these are not development areas, do we have any measure to authorize the planning commissioner to monitor those sites? Next, Mr. Tony Xie, third round. Thank you, Chairman. I want to follow up. The government had explained the chief engineer in Fanlang North, Gudong North. You know that in 2020 and 2031 we'll complete the project. This is actually an opportune moment for reviewing the supernumerary posts. That is what our manpower needs are. But now it is proposed to be converted into a permanent post. I want to look at page 20. On paragraph 64, the government says that these three departments, the increase in directorate level staff and other manpower increase we see works. There's a heavy workload. There's been an increase of 9 posts in 9 years and 0 in lands department. So the lands department deals with land issues, but you don't increase manpower. How can they do a good job? Well, you say there's a lot of follow-up work. There are works, and then you have to do planning. But then I want to ask, you can cope? Are you so capable? You can add workload but not manpower? Now, lands department has a representative here. Don't they have to coordinate efforts so that you can do your works? Isn't there increase in workload? Chairman, I would like them to provide a written response. I'd like to know in the last 10 years, these three departments, regarding the increase in post ABC, I would like the statistics. And I think in B, there should be some professionals. How many technical staff have you increased? We need to know. Were they too focused on works? And if they do a good job in works, then it would appease us if they had increased manpower there. But then there has been a lot of controversy in previous years. So if they don't have figures, then maybe they can provide a written response later. I'd also like them to the planning department to respond. Well, they need to do planning. Why don't they increase manpower? They are dealing with town planning issues. It was a supernumerary post, and we had supported that. Oh, Secretary, thank you, Chairman. We will provide a written response after the meeting. It's not that we're not adding manpower to planning department. Whenever we add a post, there's a process. Is there a operational need? If there is, we are willing to assist planning department apply for the relevant resources. Well, isn't the planning done first before the engineering works are conducted? Time's up. You'll have to do with a written response. Mr. Wuchiwai. Chairman, my previous question was not answered. I recall the different planning offices. There was an office for Langtao, and then they sought more resources. So when there was an office for Langtao, there was more than one permanent chief engineer. So that's why I asked the question. Is it in the government establishment, these posts, is it like a legion and an army where we have a captain, a lieutenant, and so on? Well, we have to be very careful in supernumerary posts, because when the project ends, the person is released, and then you have some recurrent work divided in the CEDD. So we now have the different projects managed by CEDD, and in the coming 5 or 6 years, these will come to an end. So in 5 or 6 years' time, shouldn't you be reviewing these supernumerary posts and see whether these different officers can redeploy their manpower? Otherwise, otherwise, aren't we just doing establishment work for establishment's sake? And the multi-use concept, I don't see why that is being handled by the GPA. Of course, if you consult the different departments and whether anybody needs access to this, well, that is a typical arrangement. But I'm saying, in the project, can you set aside some manpower or capacity? So in the future, could you add extra capacity? So aside from developing new sites when we run out of, can't we add another few stories to buildings? Well, thank you for the question. Regarding the multi-purpose, maybe I didn't answer clearly just now. Our thinking is, if planning department says the site can be built to a certain ratio, we will utilize it to the maximum level. So even, I don't understand why you don't have sufficient departments. So we have other social services who need the resources. So you have utilized it to the maximum, but could you, because there are restrictions right now, you cannot build more than 10 stories and so on, but then in the future it might change. Well, your time is up. Third round, Mr. Aulok Kim. Chairman, I need to express my view. On the last occasion, Ms. Ho should recall I talked about Hong Kong Island planning issues, and it's more or less related to the establishment. And I received a lot of phone calls after the meeting from officials. I mentioned Aplei Zhao 137. They said the government would not consider projects. They would sell the land. It would be auctioned. As that's how they communicate with legislators. That is coordination. We're not asking for their support. They're not asking for support for establishment. They're saying, we're not going to negotiate with you. We're going to give you a forehand, backhand slap. So that is how they... What is your question, Mr. Ao? Mrs. Yip? Hong Kong Island issues need attention. For example, the police quarters in Western. For 13 years, the police have been... We've been asking for 13 years how police is using that piece of land, and recently the police said they have policy support to demolish and rebuild. So it's going to be used for police quarters. And people have called for public open space, social services, and now you're saying that you want to create a D2 post for in the GPA. So what coordination work has GPA done? So by creating a post, does that mean there's coordination with the police regarding multi-purpose use? Secretary? Thank you for the question. Well, having the GPA post, let me try to respond to Mr. Siu Ga Zhen's question. We do have a multi-purpose use. So why do we create a post? Why did the budget set aside some money? Because we see internally that it seems that there is room for improvement. In the past, these multi-purpose projects, we had to rely on the different bureau departments to take the initiative. But then each department would have their own agenda. So this internal coordination work, we would like it to be handled centrally. And you're saying that when GPA has extra manpower, we do have expectations to enhance coordination. We also need to get more feedback from the district. Well, if you create a post, but ultimately the government departments do their own thing, well, I don't see how you can coordinate. But if you say, from now on, you can put a halt to these unjustified planning, you can get input from the districts, then yes, I agree, it's valuable. But no, the mistakes are already committed. The quarters are built. Well, Mr. Ao, your time's up. We now have Dr. Fernando Zhang. Well, they say creating these posts could allow them to get more feedback from the district. But in the past, we had collusion between 4 parties, and these parties have overlapping identities. We have the officials, the businesses, the rural leaders. So what new initiatives do you have to really hear from the residents? That is, the people most affected, people's livelihood, people, villages, people's families that are being affected. Yes, receiving feedback from the district, we rely on the district councils. We also work with Home Affairs Bureau, and that is how we receive feedback. Well, if you say there are other stakeholders, the Gaifeng, the OI, let's say there's a GIC that is being developed and they're concerned, we are very willing to receive their feedback. Well, you don't know these people. How do you get their feedback? The affected residents, what are their characteristics? You might not even be able to describe that. A lot of people in the past, they were the last people to know about these developments, especially the non-indigenous residents. So when you create these posts, what measures do you have to get feedback? Well, if you are referring to the multi-use projects, well, there are very diverse channels in the past. When the budget had announced projects in Shanghai to Munchunwan and so on, people interested will contact us, and we're very willing to meet with them. Well, members, we still have 3 in the queue. And Mr. Eddie Chu in the second round, and in the 4th round we have Wu Jiwai, Tony Jie, and Ao Kim. Now, this item has been under discussion for a long period. Anybody else? Mr. Eddie Chu? Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions to follow up on Mr. Siu Gajun, the Chief Town Planner, and amending the Town Planning Ordinance. I see in paragraph 39, it is not made clear. In southern Langtao, there isn't a DPA, but that's not just the Langtao South.
So there are other districts like this. So for this change, here you say that who will enhance the monitoring of certain rural areas. So for those without DPA covering, they will be protected in one go because of a new piece of legislation. Thank you for your question. And for this review, we won't just look at South Lantau, but it's like what Mr. Ediju says, that is, all those areas without DPA will be covered. No, we are not doing that either. Our major goal is to look at areas that are not covered by DPA, and they are in the rural areas, and they are also under certain development pressure. So I think we are very concerned about rural areas like this. We are afraid that people will be filling the sites with earth or other materials. Yes, I understand that you are not including the urban areas, and I think my view is similar to that of the Deputy Secretary. So when the town planning ordinance is extended to the NT, when you look at the OZP, you see that there are areas that are covered by DPA, some others are not. So in this review, you will cover all these, right? Yes, you can say so. As you said just now, actually it's right. We are not focusing on the urban area this time. We want to cover non-DPA areas, and they are rural areas. And in the past, we've received complaints, and these places are facing development pressure. So we think we should accord priority to such areas. Is there a timetable for the review? We hope that we can do it within this year. And there will also be discussions with the electrical. And also for a multi-purpose site, for the task force on land supply, has mentioned that 2030 plus has missed something. For example, it missed calculating the need for elderly homes. For certain public facilities, now we don't have any standards for the public markets. So for these multi-purpose sites, if you cannot show us that you will have new standards, and no matter whether they are markets or elderly homes, then there will be a problem. And the general public would not feel that they can benefit from any of this. So what are the community's needs, and how is the government going to cater for these needs? Deputy Secretary? As for GIC facilities, you talked about Hong Kong planning guides and standards. Well, actually, whenever that we plan a GIC, we will ask the relevant government departments. So for public markets, we will ask FHD and the Food and Welfare Bureau, and if they think there is a need, they can raise their hands. Okay, the next one is Mr. Wu Chi-wai, fourth round. Chairman, 2 points. I think we have to clarify this. I personally understand that you are going to develop anti-north and you need extra hands. So if you apply for supernumerary posts, I don't have any objection. But if you are turning supernumerary posts into permanent ones, then I have to give it a very careful consideration. For CEDD is responsible for the West Kowloon Cultural District basements, Chiang Kwan O, Lam Chin Tunnel, etc. So in the coming 5 to 6 years, these projects will be completed. So by 2026, when you review the human resources of the CEDD, then you come and ask me for more manpower support. But now you are trying to turn this post into permanent ones. I don't think it's appropriate. I do not accept this. And secondly, for the Chief Estate Surveyor of the JPA, if you ask whether other government departments want to use your GIC complex, it all depends on whether the departments have enough resources. For example, we do not have enough elderly homes. So if there is a site available, would the Labor and Welfare Bureau give enough resources to the department for using the site? So if you can solve this problem, then I think the government departments will definitely tell you they need to use the site. So it's not about coordination. Well, internal coordination is also very important. According to our past experience, well, departments would have to negotiate for a very long time, and that would delay the projects. As to whether departments would want to put the facilities in the GIC complex, it depends on whether they can get the relevant resources. So what are we going to do this time? We want it to be a multi-purpose site, and if at a certain point we encounter problems, we will have an internal meeting which is chaired by the Secretary for Development. If that still cannot be done, we still have another committee under the Financial Secretary, so he can take care of the resource allocation issue. So the meeting levels can be escalated, and if there are problems, we definitely can resolve them. Okay, third round, 33. This is my last round of question. Paragraph 35 is about the chief town planner. It says that he has to look at previous judicial review results, and when he formulates future OCPs, he would have to make reference to such judgments. And he particularly mentioned the Chanka Lam case. This is about the enclaves in the NT and how much land should be reserved, etc. Now it seems that certain OCPs are being shelved. So what is your next step? So for the indigenous villages, if they tell you a certain number, you just accept it, and then you will draw a big V zone. Thank you for your question. For the Chankalam case, yes, the court has asked the town planning board to reconsider 3 OCPs, and one of the court's suggestions is that in country parks there are enclaves, and if there are V zones, how big should the V zones be? Now we are looking at the judgment and we are following up. If the OCPs are to be considered by the town planning board again, what should be done? Like the member said, well, if the village representative tells that he needs to build a certain number of village houses in the coming 10 years, then we will just believe him, or that we would make use of other channels. We would also look for other data so that we can have a better understanding of the needs. So we are looking at this. Can you be more specific? Now, when you deliberate, do you just look at the need, whether there are natural needs, or do you also look at the natural environment? What I mean is that even though they have the needs, you would also consider protecting the surrounding environment. Well, for the 3 OCPs that I talked about, they are all in country parks. If there are some V zones in them, the neighboring sites are mainly used as green belts or conservation areas. So when we started drawing the OCPs, conservation was the major goal. No, that's not true. The V zones are very big. We are talking about shrinking them. And what are your considerations when you scale them down? Would you query the needs, or would you try to enlarge the conservation areas in Greenbelt? Deputy Secretary? No, we would look at the village's needs for future small houses, and if they really don't need that much housing in the future, then we will scale down the V zone. This is one of the considerations. Mr. Chair Wei-Chin, Madam Chair, I actually support the creation of these posts. But for the chief engineers for Kutong North and Fanning North, the posts will be converted from supernumerary to permanent, and I don't see enough justifications. Of course, after enhancing the directorate manpower, there will also be non-directorate support. For paragraph 23 of the paper, It is about CEDD. In the year 2019 to 20, you will also enhance the non-directorate manpower. And for the Northern Office and Western Office, you will also create 23 permanent and supernumerary non-directorate posts. Paragraph 30 says that in 2019 to 20, you will be creating 19 non-directorate posts. So can you provide me with more information concerning these posts? And what are the numbers of permanent and supernumerary posts, and how many of them are professional grades, and how many of them are supporting staff? Paragraph 43 of the paper is about the chief town planner. You will just increase one post of personal secretary. Now there is a support team for the chief town planner, and there are 7 non-directorate officers. So where did this 7 non-directorate posts come from? Was it done when the supernumerary post was created? After the meeting, I'll provide all this information in writing. Mr. O'Loughlin, 4th round. Madam Chair, I want to ask questions about the chief town planner in the planning department. I hope that when we vote later, we will vote separately on these different posts. I'm not blaming Ms. Ho. I want to stress that. But for the Development Bureau and the Lands Department, I don't think they are doing their job properly. Well, for paragraph 38, it's about this post. And also, he will be looking at streamlining procedures, including streamlining the application for building height restrictions, looking at greening, etc. I'm worried that the relevant restrictions will be relaxed. You are going to streamlining the procedures. What are the reasons behind that? And secondly, earlier on, there was a proposal.
There was a height restriction, so is that related to the government's suggestion? So after streamlining, what will be different? So Ms. Ho or Mr. Low? Well, the chief town planner will be supporting a steering group, because a lot of times the industry will have some recommendations, and there might be different departments in the Development Bureau, so buildings and lands will be looking at the same issue, so there would be overlapping. So the streamlining, we're not changing our standards, or rather, if we have many departments looking at the same issue, we can try to look at whether it can be simplified. We're not changing the standards, we're just trying to delegate it to one department. So we have, in the 5th round, Dr. Fernanda Chung and Wu Ji White. So after, and Mr. O'Loughlin in the 5th round. So some members have stated they would not follow up. So after the 3 of them have asked, I'll put it to the vote. Mr. Fernando Joe, the multi-purpose, the multi-use idea, I'd urge the government to think about it seriously. If you're trying to take social services, leisure markets, and have them under one roof, especially welfare projects such as housing under one roof, that is not appropriate. So welfare residential, such as homes for the elderly, rehabilitation quarters, and so on, these should be together with other residential projects. That is, if we have public housing or private housing, whether it is a care facility, they should be put together. We should not separate them. That would be an integration with the community. So I hope you can clarify that. And second, in our past experience in Soichino, for example, you create a social service building, and what kind of services? There are very long queues. We have rehabilitation services, but for people living in the community, it's not helpful. There is a central queue, but then there is no youth center. There are no elderly centers. So the residents there won't benefit from your so-called community comprehensive services, because the labor department, welfare department, they will have a centralized queue. They don't care whether it's Soichun or Tinsoi. So that creates dissatisfaction. So I really don't see how your multi-purpose sites serve the community. I'd like the officials to have some training in social services. Otherwise, I am worried that your past bureaucracy in labor and welfare services will be misusing this precious land resource. Well, recently I've been to Soichino. I think there is a problem with the planning. The school is at the top of the mountain. The roads are narrow. The markets, wet markets, are on the mountainside. It's not convenient. Well, thank you for your opinions and recommendations. I think you're trying to say that for our GIC facilities, if it's in a densely populated area, when we do planning, we need to take note of residents' needs. So we hear your view that we should not stuff the services to that area. Well, the CEDD has a table. You said that you need to cater to the needs of NT development and your chief engineer's workload, and the time frame runs to 2025, and the majority of the major works will conclude by that time. So you can give me another table of the CEDD offices in the coming years. What are their major goals and deadlines? I think you should apply for a supernumerary post rather than a permanent post. It seems that you are just working on establishment exercise for the sake of establishment. So after reshuffling the deck, it seems that you are short-staffed, and that's why you are making these applications, and I object to that. So Mr. Wu has already expressed that view. What response do you have? Well, thank you for the comment. We are willing to review the CEDD deployment situation. I'm not talking about today. I'm talking in the future. We'd like you to assess your manpower needs. Mr. Aulakim, the last person, I have two more suggestions. This is Eastern District, Aldrich Bay. The site has been there for 10 plus years. Now, I've discussed this with the CEDD officials. So, I feel that they are very biased. Well, no matter what, please consider how these two sites can be set aside for multi-purpose use. And just now, Ms. Ho said the streamlined procedures will not change the standards, but I note on paragraph 39, the committee will scrutinize town planning board procedures. So after amendment, that means you're going to change the standards. And in the future, I hope that you can clarify what is being done. So, Secretary, you've heard Mr. Au's. What's your response regarding the town planning ordinance review? Our focus is to deal with rural areas that were not vetted, and in the past there was development pressure. So we want to see under the existing ordinance how this planning, how the planning commissioner can extend his powers to areas such as Langtao South. Okay, we'll now put the item to the vote. Do we need to call for the division bell? I already said, well, there will be a separate voting in the FC. It was mentioned just now. Mr. Wu, these involves different areas, so I would like to have a separate voting. Well, CEDD, supernumerary conversion to permanent, I'd like that to be isolated. And the multi-purpose of GPA, one is the town planner, one is the chief surveyor, and the three supernumerary to permanent posts. So we will vote on the three items. So the first one is CEDD posts, and we need to ring the division bell. We are voting on the three conversion of supernumerary to permanent posts.
planning 一個，然之後 GPA 兩個，而家係跟住 planning 係一個GPA 係一個 head 啊嘛 planning 同 lens 嚇 GPA 又一嚿，就三種。冚唪唥係 GPA 啊，第三屆。即係第一個係3個 CEDD 嘅職位，第二一個第住就 GPA 2個位。再提醒各位委員一次。
We will be voting on 3 separate items. The first one is CEDD supernumerary to permanent posts.要提佢。
數1個投票啦，咁你問下要唔要縮？
我可以㗎係嘛？
你問佢哋
同意得。
如果要縮咧，就要佢哋講，咁可以就1分鐘，可以做3次。
請各位準備表決，開。
For voting, now we can start voting. Before I declare the results, please check your voting. Voting stops. Result displayed. 29 present, 13 say yes, 10 say no, and 1 abstains. So this is for the first batch, the 3 chief engineer posts in the CEDD, and we still have 2 batches. Anyone agrees that the bell ringing time be reduced to 1 minute? That's proposed by Mr. Ho Chun-yin. All agree, right? So now we are voting on the second batch. 1 chief town planner in the planning department, changing from supernumerary to permanent, and 1 chief estate surveyor in the lands department. The bell will ring for 1 minute. 3 batches. We will have the last batch, which is GPA.
而家開始表決咯。
Voting starts. Now, before I declare the result, please check your voting. Voting stops. The result is displayed. 29 present, 21 are in favor of the proposal, 5 are against, and 2 abstains. The proposal is passed. Now we are going to vote on the third batch. That is in the GPA. The government will create 1 AO staff grade C post. It's time limited, and under the GPA, 1 permanent post of Chief Estate Surveyor D1. The bell will also ring for 1 minute. Voting starts. Before I declare the results, please check your voting. Voting stops. The results will be displayed. 29 present, 18 are in favor of the proposal, 9 against, and 1 abstains. I declare that this proposal is passed. So at the FC, this should be voted on separately, right? Because actually these posts are quite different. Can they be divided into 3 papers? We will talk to the Development Bureau. Last night, Mr. Au Nok Hin raised certain questions, and I hope that before going to the FC, the Development Bureau can give these answers in writing. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 2. Proposed creation of 2 permanent posts of 1 AO staff grade B and 1 assistant director of marine in the Marine Department with effect from the 1st of June 2019 or upon approval of the FC, whichever is later, to enhance marine safety and to lead a new division in the department to strengthen the regulatory regime of local vessels upon the disbandment of the task force on reform in MD, Marine Department. Here we have several government officials with us. Ms. Angela Lee, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing. Ms. Macy Cheng, Director of Marine. Mr. Wong Sai-Fat, Deputy Director of Marine. Mr. Freely Cheng, Deputy Director of Marine Special Duties. Mr. Chong Kwok Pan is the Chairman of the Economic Development Panel. Mr. Chung is not here today, so I'll just tell you roughly what was discussed at the Economic Development Bureau. On the 19th of December 2018, at the panel meeting, they discussed these proposal. Members broadly supported the proposal so as to enhance the overall management of the Marine Department and to improve marine safety. And some members think that the Lama vessel accident report on Marine Department personnel's behavior should be made public so that the public would know what the report is about and they would understand the internal problems of the Marine Department. The relevant information is in paper CB 44221819 bracket 1. We have Dr. KK Kwok, Au Lok Hin, Martin Liu, Lo Wai Kwok, and me in the line waiting for asking questions. First, Dr. KK Kwok. Madam Chair, I support the creation of the posts. Well, we still remember the Lama accident, but after creating these posts, can similar marine accidents be avoided in the future? We know that in the Marine Department, there are a lot of bad habits and practices, and they have been there for years, including the vessel inspection scheme. It seems that it doesn't exist, and all the so-called safety devices are fake. If you don't believe me, you can check our ferries. The so-called safety devices are not well indicated. And for Hong Kong waters, there are not only Hong Kong vessels. Last month, there was a tragedy off Lamma Island. Actually, it wasn't Hong Kong waters. There was this local fishing boat which was hit by a mainland oil tanker. And Mr. and Mrs. Ho, the fishermen on the boat, disappeared. And I haven't read any news about them so far, so I think it's a tragedy. Now that piece of water is very close to Hong Kong, but we cannot detain that oil tanker. Even though that oil tanker is very irresponsible, it can still flee. So for this oil tanker, it berthed safely at Zhuhai as if nothing had happened. So for our waters, there are a lot of local vessels. They can come in and go out freely, or they can just pass by our waters. So for Hong Kong waters, how can we ensure our safety? This is not the first accident. Earlier on, if you remember, a few years ago, there was a Ukraine ship. It was also hit by a mainland ship, and a number of Ukrainian seafarers were dead. So for this accident, local fishermen died, and it's very difficult for small boats like that to avoid being hit by bigger vessels from the mainland. Now we are talking about fishing boats and smaller vessels in Hong Kong waters. How can you ensure the safety? Ms. Lee, well, Dr. Kwok asked about how local marine safety can be enhanced if we create these two posts. Actually, for the Assistant Director of Marine, he's going to lead a newly created local vessels division. Now, we have made a lot of reforms in the past few years concerning local vessel safety. And we have also been tabling legislative amendments. Now, in order to enhance supervision and monitoring in the long run, we need to set up a local vessels division in the Marine Department. This is about monitoring the operation of local vessels. So that's why we need to create this post, and then we will have more dedicated manpower to take care of local vessel safeties. Director of Marine. When it comes to management culture, I would like to ask this. Can you answer me about the mainland oil tanker Tianyi number 5? Do you want to supplement? How can we make sure that such accidents will not happen in the future? When it comes to preventing accidents for overseas vessels, I think I'm talking about mainland vessels. Now, they have to follow international marine laws. But what if they don't follow? Now they have fled. So when we manage our waters, we have to ensure that they abide by the rules. But if it's outside Hong Kong waters, of course, we cannot enforce the law. However, within Hong Kong waters, we have our own patrol inspectors, and they would go on board to make sure that they comply with local laws. I asked you about Tianyi number 5 because it's very close to Hong Kong waters. Well, you know, Hong Kong waters are very close to mainland waters, and nobody can predict such accidents. Even if it's outside our boundary, would you follow up with the mainland authorities because the fishermen died? Well, I think it's an invisible line, so what would you do? Deputy Director, thank you for your concern. Earlier on, you asked about the collision between the fishing boat and the oil tanker. And for that fishing boat, the couple was recovered and their corpses were returned to their family. Well, this accident happened outside Hong Kong waters. We have liaised with the relevant department on the mainland, and now they are carrying out investigation. So this is what I want to supplement. Thank you. Next, Mr. O'Loughlin. Chairman, for these 2 newly created posts, they have a major duty. That is, they have to reform the regulation of local pleasure boats, and there are at present a number of problems. The number of leisure boats has increased significantly, but there are not enough berthing places.
So whether the media or ombudsman, they have mentioned management is very chaotic. For example, the occupants of berthing places are making obscene profits, and some people, they provide so-called maintenance service, but they also rent it out at a high rate. So how can you handle this after reform? So even for non-registered yachts operating in Hong Kong waters, if there isn't a relevant berthing policy, I think these problems will continue to fester. So your 2 posts, will they deal with these problems? Regarding berthing, the government's consideration is to ensure that local vessels have sufficient typhoon shelter in inclement weather or typhoons. That we need to ensure safety. So our planning, we have typhoon shelters and other berthing during typhoon weather. So the 2 posts are not directly related to this planning because the Marine Department has a division doing the planning and marine services. So they will continue to do this planning work. And of course, in our recommendation, they will continue to operate, but they will continue their existing work. The Assistant Director of Marine will continue with his work. So what about the rental pleasure vessels? Your paper has mentioned that. But if you are just dealing with the rental of pleasure vessels, because some vessels are for rent and some are not for rent. Some will return to the typhoon shelter they need to berth. Well, the relevant bodies will ask you to enlarge the typhoon shelter, increase berthing space. But if you don't manage the current berthing problems, you haven't resolved the issue. Well, regarding management of pleasure vessels, the director can elaborate. Well, Mr. Ao, you had posed two questions. One was safety. So in the paper, our local vessel group will deal with safety standards. We have visited the Economic Services panel and provided our proposals and received support. So we will be amending the legislation. The management will be improved and we will amend the legislation. So these safety standards and the local communication with the local industry, that work will be conducted by our local division. Mr. Ao also mentioned a berthing issue. That comes under planning. The Deputy Secretary said we have a planning group, and this group will deal with those issues. So if we are able to create the two permanent posts of Assistant Director and Marine Department posts, they will handle policy issues and our administrative officers will lead this work. So they will conduct a review of the situation. Mr. Martin Liao? Thank you, Chairman. According to the government's paper, the Assistant Director will lead a new division in the department, and it will strengthen the regulatory regime of local vessels. And last year, the industry had voiced strong opinions, and it's been a year. So what progress has the government made with the industry? Have they been able to entertain the industry's requests? And after following up for so many years, and why do we still have such a vocal feedback from the industry? So how can you persuade us that after creating these posts, you can appease all parties? Well, regarding local pleasure vessels, we had visited the Economic Services panel for consultation, and we heard legislators and the industry specific requests, and subsequently the Marine Department had further communication. We amended some definitions of what large pleasure vessels are, and we put forward some clear guidelines for inspection. And in January this year, we visited Economic Services panel again and received their support. We have taken on board the industry's views and made some amendment, and they have accepted our amendments. Any questions of Mr. Martin Liao? Director, regarding the supernumerary posts in the last 6 years, in the past, the Marine Department in the management work had some issues. These cultural issues need a long-term solution. So the supernumerary post will expire in May this year. We need a post to deal with these long-standing recurrent problems. So in Annex 6 you can see if we don't create the post, we have one assistant director handling more than 10 divisions. So in the long run, we need to rationalize the workload. If you rely on one assistant director, that workload would be too heavy. So based on these reasons, we feel the supernumerary post should be converted into permanent so that we can enhance the Marine Department's management culture. I think the question was not comprehended accurately. The question was, after this post is created, then what assistance can it provide to the steering committee? It's because the issues were not handled previously, but how can having a permanent post resolve these issues? Yes, the steering committee called for 3 amendments: marine safety, management, culture, process, and so on. And the third area was our manpower shortload and succession. So in these 3 areas, in the 6 years, we exerted a lot of effort. We had a lot of reform regarding marine safety. These are being submitted to LegCo, and it's not complete. Regarding management culture, whether it's communication, internal communication, work process, the computer system, we are making large strides in improvement, but the work is continuous. And third, we have significant manpower shortage, and we have conducted a establishment review, and we received support. We now have young recruits joining us. Thank you. Mr. Lowaiko. Chairman, I support the 2 permanent posts, a D3 and D2 post. As a matter of fact, this is necessary, and you can say the Marine Department reform, it is another step forward in the Marine Department reform. They also need more manpower. We need to step up we have to step up the marine regulatory regime, and we also need to enhance the culture. Recently, Marine Department had some new policy initiatives submitted to LegCo, including the life jackets and new designs, and the vessel owner responsibilities, the vessel captain responsibilities, and so on. We also have new initiatives regarding driving under the influence of alcohol and medication. So our party supports this initiative. So having a D2, D3 post, that receives our full support. So I also don't have further questions. I just wish to express my support, and of course it should be submitted to FC as soon as possible. Thank you, Chairman. No response needed? Okay. My turn. I have two questions. First of all, D3 will lead a new division in the department to strengthen regulatory regime of local vessels. And the first question is, I recently received a lot of complaints. The yachts in Disco Bay, or some people have converted it into a residential purpose, and that is illegal. But it's been ongoing for quite a while. It's they have spent a lot of money and made the vessel very livable. So why aren't you enforcing the law? You should be enforcing the law. Director, well, the vessels under the law, they, aside from our permission, we only have 4 vessels that can be used as a residential purpose. The government has disallowed the use of vessels as a residential quarters. So aside from the 4 permitted vessels, other vessels do not allow the use of these vessels as a permanent residential unit. So we have patrol units in the typhoon shelter to conduct patrol work to see whether there are people living on the vessels. If it's a short term, it's not a residential unit. Let's say they are on a day trip. Our patrol colleagues have been monitoring the situation, but if we need to enforce the law, we need sufficient evidence that they are using it as a long-term residential unit. So we need to strike a balance regarding privacy. We need to collect evidence, and we also need to consider vessel safety.
So when it comes to law enforcement, in particular, now we know about the situation in Discovery Bay, so we have stepped up our patrolling. We have also been enhancing education. We've been distributing pamphlets reminding the pleasure boat owners that they cannot leave on the boats. Well, for Discovery Bay and the Gold Coast, a lot of people know about this, and I think there are a lot of disputes. Actually, such disputes are unnecessary. And I want to ask about typhoon shelter in particular. Now, in the Southern District, we have the Aberdeen typhoon shelter. And after the typhoon Kumquat, we've heard that the typhoon shelter is very congested, and now the water is also at a very high level. So will you be building other typhoon shelters so that the congestion can be less serious? And how can you ensure that the water is at a safe level? Well, for typhoon shelter, we have been monitoring the situation. And when it comes to berths, we have conducted a review. And until 2029, we'll still have berths in typhoon shelters during bad weathers. We understand that during the last typhoon there were some problems because weather changes all the time. Is it still safe for us to provide these berths? Are there enough berths, etc.? So now a study is being carried out on marine facilities, and in particular when the weather changes, do we plan to upgrade the relevant facilities? Now a study is being conducted, and we'll try to find out whether certain marine facilities should be improved. Yes, I understand that under the Development Bureau, such a study is being carried out. So for this new post, will they make improvements to the typhoon shelters? Will those be the duties of the 2 new posts? Now, for marine facilities planning, now we have an assistant director doing it. That is the planning division. And in the future, he will be reporting to the assistant director of marine. That is this new post. Mr. Ip Jiming. Well, I'm not a member of this panel, but this is related. The topic is related to my constituents. Just now, Mr. Martin Liu asked about the follow-up work of the Lama accident. Now, I have been discussing with my industry, and now I think the improvement work is being carried out, and there are some legislative amendments. The number of vessels has been increasing, and the marine department's workload has also been increasing, so I believe that they need to increase their manpower. Just now, Mrs. Ip asked about post-typhoon work. Actually, we had meetings with the relevant government departments, and a number of improvement measures have to be carried out. So the government has to give us a timetable. And for the questions concerning typhoon shelter, that is, we do not have enough berths, etc., and also about improvements works to such facilities, etc. We are still waiting the government's actions. Now, I agree that more AO should be provided to the Marine Department. Well, for Hong Kong's marine legislations, I think many of them are now outdated. I think you really should update them. That's why I support the creation of these two posts. Madam Chair, I do not need their answers. I hope that they can do things as fast as possible. Yes, I think the government department has already heard you. Next, Mr. Ho Chun-yin. Now, I will extend the meeting by 15 minutes. I hope that we can finish this paper within this meeting. I agree with Mr. Yik. Yes, we have a lot of work to do, and the coming period will be critical. Well, for the past decades, the Marine Department might have made some mistakes, maybe stole to the system, and there are a lot of gaps. For example, vessel inspection, I think the problem still has not been resolved. I'm sure Mr. Wong Sai-Fat has heard us. First, I would like to thank the director and the deputy director. Mr. Wong and Mr. Cheng have helped us a lot. Last time we were talking about the length and tonnage of pleasure boats, and there were some chaos in the industry. EQ, Eunice Yong, and the Madam Chair have helped us that there have been some coordination and adjustments have been made. So in the past few years, you have been working towards these goals, and now you are trying to enhance the regulatory regime of local vessels. Well, this may exert certain pressure on the industry. As for regulation, it can be too strict or too lenient. If the government want to achieve certain goals, maybe he would be able to do his job. However, you still have to look at the actual situation of the industry. And in paragraph 9 of the paper, I don't have the paper with me now, but I remember paragraph 9. You talked about examination. You have to look into an examination system. Now there are all sorts of different licenses, old and new licenses as well. So the government has to reform the examination system. I discovered in recent years that new license holders don't know how to steer a boat because they just have to do written examinations. Well, it depends on what license it is, Madam Chair. Well, maybe you think it's easy. That's for a group of people. However, for the fishermen, it's a different story. Now, many years ago, we were mainly applying between Hong Kong and the mainland. And our fishermen got their licenses on the mainland. However, for the mainland system, they do not issue new license, or they do not renew the license of fishermen after they reach the age of 60. The government tells us that even at the age of 60, we still have to work. So if the fishermen do not have the mainland license, it's very difficult for them to continue to operate. And even for pleasure boat captains, they also hold the same license. So I think the government should review this. That is, well, these are very experienced people. So you should allow them to continue to steer boats. And I understand that safety is of the utmost importance. So you should look at the policy and see how you'll be able to help them. Just now, Mrs. Yip talked about houseboats. Well, the director told us that, well, people cannot live on boats. But how can you catch me? People have been doing this, and some houseboats are connected permanently to water supply and electricity supply. So what are you going to do? Now we do not have enough space in typhoon shelters. So I think you should enforce the law as early as possible. If you procrastinate, then this mistake would not be ratified in time. And the government has a consultancy report, and we are not too satisfied with that. The director had a meeting with us. You say that you will spend 2 years' time on implementing the recommendations in the report. I hope that you can report back to us as early as possible. Now we really do not have enough berths. Who's going to answer the question? Deputy Secretary, yes, we have Mr. Ho. We understand that when we conduct whatever reviews, safety is the most important thing, and we also need to consult the industry. With the help of the Marine Department, we will continue to do this. How about the examination system? Mr. Wong, thank you for your question. Well, with regard to the examination system, we've heard Mr. Ho's views. So for examination systems, after a certain period of time, we will review the system. And we would also look at the examination questions. We are exactly doing that right now. One last question. Well, I said just now that a lot of new license holders don't know how to steer a boat. It's not exactly true. They just dare not steer a boat. Yes, we've heard your view. For the examination system, we will try to strike a balance, or we do not have enough manpower. So for certain examination systems, we may have to make changes. And we will also review examination questions. Well, for the candidates, you say that some of them, even after passing the examinations, they still do not dare to steer boats, and we will look at that. Will you test the real steering skill other than written examinations? We are reviewing this. We are particularly looking at local vessels, and we hope that we can have a qualification framework. So we studying in depth our examination questions. We hope that having a qualification framework, boat captains can be more qualified. Mr. James Toh. Now, you already have several reports. Some of them are not open to the public. There is an internal investigation report, and you have not made it public yet. I will not give up, and the families won't give up either. Well, it is a very important reference point for the community, because we would then know whether you are really targeting the problems when you try to make improvements. Now, in the past few years, some senior officials have been parachuted into your department, and you had this task force on reform in MD, and now you want to create some more directorate posts. For that task force on reform, well, it discovered a number of serious problems, and now you think some of the problems have been ratified, and you want to create some more directorate posts. So what is the next phase work? Well, don't tell me that you are going to follow up continuously. Well, are the most of operations different when you compare now with that time? Thank you, Mr. James Toh. We are here today to apply for the creation of these two posts. And also we will be creating non-directorate posts. We will have a senior AO post as well. So for the other posts, if this application is successful, we will create a dozen non-directorate posts. After creating these two posts, there will be structuring. If we have a permanent deputy director, he will take the lead in terms of policy making and planning, as well as legislative amendments. And for management and financial matters, well, AOs are more specialized in those, so he will also be taking up those jobs. So if we have a permanent deputy director, then our work will be further rationalized. For departments that are to be led by professionals, we will continue to do so.
The other work will be handled by the AO. So in the long term, if we can rationale the workload, the whole division of labor should be much more effective. Now, in the past, you didn't have frequent increases. So why do you, how can you justify the workload being divided? In the past, you had a technical director, and these are very technical requirements. So the division heads should just follow their orders. So something simple, it was technical. You need to bear in mind all this marine legislation is very technical. So you just needed one assistant director. So why do you need to divide it up into two groups now? And because at that level they are already an assistant director, a deputy director. Well, there is a reason why we need to divide the workload. If you look at Annex 6, you'll see if we divide the two posts, there is already an existing division. If we don't divide it up, when the task force is disbanded, then the assistant director will be leading 10 divisions, more than 10 divisions. So in the last 6 years, after setting up the task force, the original posts, they cannot handle the workload. So one assistant director leading so many divisions, that has been the case for decades. But just to register vessels, if you compare the 1990s, there's an increase of 170%. In the last few years, every year, we have an increase of 7% of vessels being registered. So we feel if this continues, one assistant director cannot lead so many divisions. And I agree with Mr. To. We have a lot of technical laws and a lot of legislation that is not technical. We have, for example, vessels used for residential purposes, the patrol of typhoon shelters, how to strike a balance. So these are policy matters. So it's not just technical. So we feel if we divided the work have two people manage the workload and led by an assistant administrative officer. These are their strengths. They can handle the policy and financial issues. I've been on the ESC panel for a few years, and I don't see posts created for internal management. And typically, we create a post because there's a new workload. There might be new demands, a new regulatory regime, and so on. But now we are creating two posts to strengthen the regulatory regime. So this is not seen so often. And second, the coordination, the DS, Department Secretary, should be responsible. So why do we need an administrative officer? Now, I agree we need to strengthen the regulatory regime, but for internal coordination, I find that strange. They need to be politically sensitive and so on. In the Marine Department wasn't that organized in the past, that is a fact, and we need more than a person managing the Marine Department. We need a framework. So why do you need a person to handle the internal management? Is it because of my lack of experience? Could the government respond? Why do they need? Well, the DS cannot coordinate all the affairs. Who can answer the issue? Well, internal governance. Not every department needs to deal with that, but the Marine Department, if you recall, after the Lama incident, we did a lot of review, and we see internally this department has a lot of areas that need improvement, and it is a very unique situation. We also have a lot of manpower problems because we have two technical departments. Their turnover and vacancy is between 30-40%, and that does not exist in other government departments. So we need a lot of management, people with management experience, for example, when there's a severe manpower shortage, how to deal with it. So even though we have done a review on the establishment, but the problems are not resolved. We have succession problems. Our average age is 59 years old. So how can we move forward in the future? These are all management issues. Well, how do you measure the efficacy? Are you saying, well, I have a case, and do you have a performance pledge that the case can be handled in a month or two? Well, we need quantifiable indicators. So, because all your processes are the same, well, how can we measure whether this person is effective? Thank you, Chairman. The difference is quite significant. Starting with manpower shortage, in the last 6 years we had the task force. I know in the last 6 years the task force on reform in MD, the post is held by the assistant director. So the whole establishment is reviewed. How can they introduce manpower? That means you recruited more people. No. The whole framework. What qualifications, who should be recruited, why can't they recruit people, all that has been reviewed. But we still haven't resolved the long-term manpower shortage. We still have to do a lot of work. Could you tell us with the creation of this post, how do we measure this person's efficacy? Because it should be the director's responsibility. Well, we do have a lot of goals in manpower and succession. We have goals. Let's say in 5 years, we would like to handle the succession and recruitment problems. So even with these in place, how do you ensure that these problems won't resurface? So it has to be recurrent, and that's just manpower is just one example. I have other procedures, such as how to archive documents and so on. The assistant director will lead a team that only exists in our department. We will have an audit, not financial audits, but whether they complied with our procedures. We cannot allow problems to resurface. Well, isn't this work that is very typical? That is auditing and document archival. Well, because of time constraints, I'll allow Mr. Jeremy Tam to ask the question and conclude the meeting. Well, I support the post creation, but the Marine Department needs to consider the marine incident investigations. The post should be isolated, and in fact it should be removed from the Marine Department. But that might be difficult, but at least this shouldn't be under deputy director. It should be directly under the director, because after an investigation they report to the deputy director. Some accidents might be due to the Marine Department internal issues, but if you look at the organization chart, they are all at the same horizontal level. But if you could redeploy the work, there's no need for extra manpower. Could you just have the person report directly to the director, secretary, or director? Thank you for the question. Marine investigations, why can it be handled independently? It's because the international marine laws are different from civil aviation. In marine requirements, there's no need for an independent body, but in order to deal with it more independently, the investigation group, it's a policy unit, and they focus on international marine law amendments. They don't deal with regulatory investigation and so on. We want it to be more independent, and we have been audited by the International Maritime Organization, and the ICAC had also audited our framework, and they didn't find any issues. So we will continue. But I understand legislators' concern about independence, so we will ensure that the unit is independent even after reform. Well, how long? Well, how far apart are these reforms, and when was the last change? You're not using this opportunity to isolate. Of course, I understand you are in compliance with IMO. It's the same with civil aviation. Well, ultimately, ICAO required that, and they had to comply. But whether it is reasonable and whether the regulations require you, well, I think you can consider that. I don't see any downside by isolating it and reporting directly to the director. But they are now reporting to a deputy director. Are they very senior? Of course they are senior, but how many deputy directors do we have? If you look at the hierarchy, there are 6 or 7 deputy directors, and then so the deputy director will be responsible. So the deputy director, will they report to the director? Well, I think I'll end. You can consider. Thank you. Any response? I will consider Mr. Tam's recommendation. Because of time constraints, we'll have to adjourn. When's the next meeting? Next meeting, 30th of April, 2:30 to 6:30. Thank you, everybody.